Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
The India-China disengagement in Pangong is going on, and as usual, Parliament's on, so there are charges and counter-charges. So we'll leave that aside. We will use this period of a little bit of respite on the tactical picture to look at the strategic or larger picture vis-a-vis China. And we have an opportunity now, so let's now reverse the way we look at the situation. Let's look at India from the point of view of China, or as China looks at India. And why do I say that we have an opportunity? I will tell you. So late last night, as I read up a lot of the Western media, I found from one of the handles I follow, Twitter handles I follow. Twitter handle is Nukestrat, Nukestrat. So Nukestrat is run by a well-known strategic scholar called Hans Christensen. Hans Christensen is director of Nuclear Information Project of Federation of American Scientists. So he shared a link from what is called as CASI, C-A-S-I, that is China Aerospace Studies Institute. Now this is not a Chinese institute, it's an American institute affiliated to America's Air University. So Air University is a premier American institution headquartered at Maxwell Air Force Base in Alabama, and it has many reputed strategic institutions affiliated to it. CASI, or the China Aerospace Studies Institute, is one of these. So what CASI has now done is they have taken a 2013 document that the Chinese PLA produced, that the Chinese PLA think tanks produced, and I will tell you where it's coming from. And so far, it was only available in their language. CASI has now put up the entire document, all 372 pages, translated into English. So CASI has published it, and that is what Hans Christensen shared as an exciting thing to read. And as we started reading it, it was an exciting thing to read. CASI has done it as part of what it calls as its Project Everest. Project Everest has something called Foreign Military Thought Series. So they study what foreign militaries or important foreign militaries are thinking. It's under that study that they have picked up this Chinese statement of doctrine, their strategic outlook, etc., which so far was not available in English language, and they have now translated it. This gives an idea of People's Republic of China's current military strategy. It has come from China's Academy of Military Sciences. So that is the think tank. It's the official Chinese PLA think tank, China's Academy of Military Sciences, and it's been cleared by the top authorities in China. So it's a definitive document. In fact, as we read up on this, we find that this academy produces a document like this once, I don't know why that timing, but once, or why that periodicity, but once in about 13 years. So this is the third document. The first was 1987, the second 2001, and third 2013. So we are looking at this document. Chances are that the next one will be 2025-26. So this is there to stay with us. Now, what would they do? They say that we do militarily. I mean, this is the formulation that the Chinese use. So don't ask me to unclutter this one, but I will just read it to you as it is translated into English. Military academic work of the Academy of Military Sciences. Now, what else will Academy of Military Sciences do but military academic work? But that's what they describe their charter as. Now all of it is fascinating, and that is responsible for denying me the night's sleep, because I sat up reading through the night, because unless you know your adversary's mind, what the adversary is thinking, you can never understand his or her actions. And also this is fascinating stuff, so I'm sharing the entire report with you. Please read that. We are not talking about the entire report. We are only focusing on the parts that talk about India, and these give you an idea of how the Chinese look at India. And as I read out the highlights, you will sit up in wonderment to realize how closely they are studying India. And frankly, how accurate is their reading in many ways. So they say, for example, that India has always seen itself as a regional power, and they acknowledge that India is a regional power in Indian Ocean region. They also say that India has always wanted domination or respect in the Indian Ocean region. Then they go on to say that there are 4 stages to how India's strategic thought has developed. First stage is 1947 to 1960. They define it as the stage of limited offensive strategy, because they say that India was economically backward in 1947 when it got independence, and militarily weak. It already had inherited confrontation with Pakistan, and it also was facing a Cold War stress, because both the US and USSR at that point were jostling for influence in the South Asian region. So India had to deal with all this. So Nehru then decided to first focus on the economy and then national defense. And for that he needed time. He needed time to build national defense, so that meanwhile he could build his economy. That's why India's strategic outlook was limited offense, that too vis-a-vis just Pakistan. Nothing to do with China, because by that time China was not a military adversary. So this led to improved deployment on India's western frontiers. India also intensified its movements in the northern region. So what India did, without resorting to anything militarily, this one says India decided to reach out and extend and consolidate its reach along the frontiers with Tibet, which means, as the Chinese say, south of the McMahon line, which of course they call a fictitious concept, but McMahon line is McMahon line. So they say that India moved northwards, or from their point of view, south of the McMahon line. Essentially what that means is that India asserted control over new regions of what is the state of Arunachal Pradesh in our country, and what the Chinese call as South Tibet. I suspect this is also an oblique reference to the fact that it was in this period that India went up to Tawang and asserted control over Tawang. That is the major Khating story that we have talked about in the past. So the Chinese scholars say that by 1958, India had acquired long-term control over contested areas along Sino-Indian borders, and this had led to India setting up a Himalayan security system. What I would translate that into meaning is that today's state of Arunachal Pradesh by that time had been defined, and India had defined its borders in the eastern Himalayas, not in the way the Chinese would have wanted India to do. That's one. The second stage, they say, was the expansion on 2 fronts. That stage is headlined expansion on 2 fronts. That stage in 1960 to early 70s. So India was reeling under the impact of the war in 1962 and the defeat. So India now decided to rebuild its armed forces. So India realized it did not have the luxury of spending a lot more time on building the economy and leaving defense for later. It had to now build defense. So 1964, India started its new defense modernization plan with the first defense 5-year plan, and that involved at that point 50 billion rupees, but that is 5,000 crore rupees, a lot of money in 1964, and that is what this Chinese study lists. This led to 2 things. One, this gave India much greater strength for active operations against Pakistan, that is in the west, but also it provided for in-depth defense against China. India was still not thinking of any offensive capability against China, but in-depth defense against China. So if Chinese invaders come, they come in and then India can annihilate them. So as India's power increased, economic power increased, also India's relationship with the US improved in the early 60s, and then India became an ally with the Soviet Union. India began expansion on 2 fronts. That is the headline of this stage in India's strategic evolution, and the policy of attack to the west, that is Pakistan, and defense to the north, that is China. came into being. The part of that strategy was also to weaken Pakistan strategically. That led to the use of this superior military force against Pakistan in 1971 and dismembered the country. That is when about time that this strategy ends, or this phase of India's strategy ends. So briefly, the Chinese scholars say that India's strategic intention on land was fundamentally achieved now. So they turned their attention from South Asia to Indian Ocean region. So this became the strategy of maintain the land and control the sea. And from the seas, the Chinese mean India, but particularly referring to the northern part of Indian Ocean region, that is closer to India. And then we come to the fourth stage of India's strategic evolution as per the Chinese thinking. The fourth stage comes after the Cold War, and which is now continuing, and this is defined as regional offense turning into regional deterrence, because before that was regional offense, but now India did not have any military objectives vis-a-vis Pakistan, so deterrence was fine, both against Pakistan and China. By this time, the study says that the traditional view of annihilatory war had changed, that you no longer thought you can fight a war that destroys the other country completely. Your wars were now meant to be limited to achieve limited objectives. So that is how India built its own strategy now of regional deterrence in the 90s and influencing an entire region at the back of this deterrence. And this region was in the north from the Himalayas to deep into Indian Ocean region to the south, and also from Iran in the west to Myanmar in the east. That is how the Chinese read the Indian mind, Indian strategic mind in these decades. And then they say by now India had decided that military fighting will be only a worst case scenario. If you have strategy for regional deterrence, you also get the outcome of denial. That means denial of military objectives to any of your adversaries. The Chinese term for this is Juzhi, Juzhi. Now, what were the basic requirements for this? One, absolute military superiority in South Asia. Two, complete control and ability to prevent any ingress through sea coasts and territorial waters. But by 21st century, they say this had begun to evolve yet again. This had changed further. Why? This is the fifth stage, because India's economy had boomed. We know that this was 10 years after the economic reform. India's economy had boomed. India's gross national power had gone up. That is how most countries now do strategic analysis, gross national power. India's GNP had gone up. India's economy and military were now overwhelmingly stronger than all its South Asian neighbors together. That is Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Maldives, Nepal, etc., etc. None of these countries was anymore a threat or an existential threat to India. War with Pakistan had now become unlikely because of this differential in strength. So the only war India now thought that were small and medium scale wars at worst under the nuclear umbrella, so things don't go out of control. And India's threat perceptions had now evolved into terrorism, splitism, and transnational organized crime, and very often these were all interwoven. So that is how India's approach now became two-pronged: disciplinary deterrence with its neighbors, except with China. With China, it's passive defensive deterrence. But so with China, India's deterrence will be defensive, that you can't get anything from us. You can come and try and do something, but you will pay a big price for no gains. But with others, that if you act funny, we'll come and punish you. So that's how it became two-pronged: defensive and punitive. So this is how the Chinese defined this new Indian doctrine in the 21st century. This new doctrine meant that India would not be a threat to the existence of any country, but will be able to influence or impel our enemy countries to modify their anti-India policies through flexible use of military power in a restrained way. While this goes on, India would be willing to make its own compromises in negotiations to avoid war. And I think if you look at the history of 21st century so far, that is exactly what India has done. So you have to give the Chinese full marks for reading this right. So total war was now ruled out of the question. That was old fashioned, but high tech limited wars under a nuclear umbrella had now become part of this new Indian strategic guidance. The further change was that earlier view of passive defense, that let the enemy come in, we will then encircle the enemy and annihilate him. That had now changed to preemptive strike. Preemptive strike, and the idea that you should push the enemy back and also fight the next wars in the enemy's territory. So that is the change that took place, and this also became the guidance for operations for Indian armed forces, because nukes were seen to be as deterrent for any foreign invasion, and conventional forces were to be the spearheads of this new Indian strategy. Now the Chinese analysts further say that there are 4 interrelated basic characteristics to the evolution of Indian strategic thought. Please listen to this and please read this. This is gold, invaluable stuff, because this tells you how your largest adversary looks at you. So they say there are 4 interrelated basic characteristics to Indian strategy making. 1, there is strong geopolitical core to Indian strategic making. India believes it's the heart of Asia. South Asia is its zone of influence. 2 of its neighbors, that is Pakistan and China, are the main obstacles in achieving its geopolitical position, its deserved geopolitical position. Now they also define what is the starting point and end point of this Indian strategy. Starting point is protecting India's geopolitical interests, and end point is eliminating geopolitical obstacles. So you can translate that. I can do it again for you. Protecting geopolitical interests, that means nothing should come in the way of Indian influences. And second, obstacles that come in the way of this geopolitical preeminence, they should be eliminated, neutralized, countered, balanced, whatever, but the word they use is eliminated. Now they say despite the end of Cold War, India continued on with the same strategic formulation, which is true. Number 2, they say, fascinating, that India continued on after 47 with what it inherited from the British, which was the idea of Indocentrism. What is Indocentrism according to them? Indocentrism is India is the heart of South Asia, and regions at its peripheries, they list Kashmir, Nepal, Sikkim, Bhutan, Assam. That is the internal line of India's defense according to Indian view, and also Tibet has to be a buffer state between India and China. Then they say, obviously they call them fake, McMahon line and Johnson-Ardagh line on borders with Tibet. Those were to be India's security inner ring. That means those rings had to be defended militarily. Nehru himself saw South Asia plus Indian Ocean region as his security ring. And they say that while Nehru saw South Asia plus Indian Ocean region as a security ring, the fact is that India's strategic thought from then until now has drawn greatly from Chanakya, Kautilya. So next time somebody quotes Sun Tzu while analyzing China, don't complain because Chinese also refer to Chanakya, wanting to understand us. So they say there was a basic Chanakya or Kautilyan philosophy, which is the peripheral states or peripheral rulers or kings or nations are your main opponents. So you fight with them or subdue them. People who are far away are your friends. So go and befriend them. And that is what India has tried to do. That's what they say. And then India has followed the law of fish. You know the law of fish. Badi machli, choti machli ko khati hai. Big fish eats the small fish. So that's also a little nudge to India's smaller neighbors. Now they can decide whether India is the bigger fish or China is the bigger fish. That besides. Third point they say is limited offensive. The idea of limited offensive that has dominated Indian thought. And limited offensive, one, to dominate South Asia, and second, to control Indian Ocean region. And third, to then rise into a first-rate world power. Because to rise into a first-rate world power, India has to dominate South Asia and control Indian Ocean region. And for that, it's important that India has a strong offensive element to its planning as well. And they have noticed that as India has become stronger, it has used its armed forces overseas, particularly in Sri Lanka. But they say India still has limitations. India still cannot prevent bigger powers from exercising influence, that is America, China particularly, in the region. So India is now trying to figure out a solution to that by striking up alliances, and that is why India is reaching out, and I'll come to that in the fourth part of this. They say that India has also used this period, quote unquote, they are saying it, quote, unremitting nibbling away in peacetime, unquote, of territory along the borders with China. So they claim that India has been nibbling at their territory along the borders during this peacetime, and they say this nibbling of the territory is quite cleverly done so that defense can be turned into offense in wartime. What that means we don't know, but you can make your interpretation. The fourth point, analytical point they make, is that India now has the policy or view of deterrence in all directions, but there is a difference. This idea of deterrence in all directions breaks into two distinct halves. One is ambition for dominance, that is in India's immediate neighborhood except China. That means all other South Asian nations, India wants to dominate. So first is ambition for dominance, the other obviously is ambition for deterrence. And that is why, because India knows that its military power is limited, for the second one, India has reached out to US, Japan, improved its relations to get more people into the tent, and I presume that's how Quad came in. This paper was written much before Quad was an idea in anybody's minds, but you can see that the Chinese scholars, strategic scholars, are foreseeing the coming up of the Quad in 2013. So they say then India shifted emphasis from actual war to building deterrence. Yes, we know that, but again this deterrence also broke into two, with China dissuasive deterrence, with all the others punitive deterrence. You want an example of that? You saw with Balakot and whatever happened after that. So they conclude by saying that there are 3 Ds to India's new doctrine. 1, discourage. 2, deter. 3rd, deal. So discourage America from building exaggerated influence in the region. If they want influence, they can exercise it through India as their ally. I am adding that, they don't specify that. So discourage the US, deter China, and we've seen some of that play out in Ladakh over the past 9 months. Discourage US, deter China, and deal with Pakistan. That is how the Chinese analyzed our strategic mind in 2013. I think it's quite a sound analysis, and then they say this leads to a situation where as India's gross national power grows, they will now shift to active offense, particularly with the South Asian challenges, or whatever challenges remain, obviously only Pakistan, which would mean stabilizing their western front, that is the Pakistan front, and strengthening the northern front, so India gets more space to grow into the seas now. So it's debatable, but herein may lie the answer to the question, why did the Chinese come knocking so rudely at our doors in Ladakh last year? If they came in for territory, I can tell you, first of all, my own view, they are unlikely to get any territory. But even if you get any, even if they get any, it will be of no use strategically, politically, militarily, tactically, nothing. So why did they come? So the answer probably lies in their conclusion of how they see our strategic intentions or objectives or mind unfolding now on. So remember what did they say in conclusion? They said as India's gross national power grows now, it will go towards active offense, it will stabilize the western front, strengthen the northern front, and grow in the seas. So when they see India growing sort of towards an active offense, they mean India growing its sea power. So what have they done? They've come and they've said, hey neighbor, you still have trouble on your northern borders, so you can't take away your emphasis from this to your navy. Now this is very logical, because if one country has strategic ambitions, the other country, adversary country, tries to contain it. And this is how the Chinese have read India's strategic ambitions. Then it's quite logical that they would want to take our emphasis away from developing or investing further into our Navy, because we have now had to shift more and more budgets and emphasis to land forces and air forces.